The King and His Ribbon. There once was a great righteous king who ruled over a vast nation. The king had 12 sons who destined to one day inherit his kingdom. Outside of the king's nation lived an evil warlord who secretly wanted to control the king's nation and his people. When the king's sons were still very young, the king knew that one day he would need to leave his nation for a long period of time, and then one day return to reclaim what would be lost. Because the king's children were too young at this time for him to explain this to them, he came up with a way to be able to recognize them once he returned. The king wrote his children a letter. This was a letter with instructions on how to behave while he was away. A part of these instructions told the king's sons to always wear a ribbon around their right wrist forever. Not only were the king's sons supposed to wear this ribbon, but also all of the people in the king's nation that loved the king. The ribbon would serve as a sign to the king for when he returned. This way, he would know who his children were and those who truly loved him. The day came when the king left on his journey, with plans of not returning until many generations later. The evil warlord knew about the king's letter and his sign for his loved children and his people. The evil warlord also knew that the king's nation of people was too strong to attack directly. So the evil warlord came up with a wicked plan. He knew that one day the great king would return to his people and destroy all those who stood against him. The evil warlord knew that the king would recognize those who did not love him because they would not be wearing a ribbon on their right wrist. So, deceitfully, the evil warlord entered into the king's nation and befriended the king's sons and his people. As the king's sons and the people of the nation grew older, the evil warlord shared fables with them about the king and the meaning of his ribbon. Over time, the king's sons and their people stopped reading the letter that the king wrote to them. Instead, they just believed in and passed along the fables that the evil warlord had told them. More years went by, and the nation of people soon began to forget which wrist the ribbon was supposed to be tied on. The evil warlord, in all of his deceitfulness, lied to the king's sons and his people and told them that it did not matter which wrist they tied the ribbon around. So, more and more years passed with the nation of people wearing ribbons on either wrist. All the people at this time truly still loved the king and wore their ribbons proudly. Sadly, they did not know that wearing a ribbon on their left wrist was not the sign that the king would recognize. Many more generations continued to pass by, and over time, the king's once peaceful nation had become hostile and chaotic due to the absence of a true king. This enraged some people, and many believed that the king would never return. Some people of the nation completely quit wearing their ribbon because they no longer believed that the king would return. 70 generations went by before the king finally returned. The great and righteous king came prepared with an army to destroy all of those who stood against him, his sons, and his people. When the king arrived, he slayed many people with no mercy. These were the people who chose not to wear a ribbon at all because they despised the king and did not believe in him. Then there were those who tied a ribbon on their left wrist. Many of these people believed that one day the king would return, but they did not follow the king's instructions in his letter. The king looked upon these people and the sign they used to distinguish who they would follow. Since they did not keep his sign that he left for his people, These people were also put to death or banished to the outskirts of his kingdom because he did not know them. Out of the vast number of people in the king's nation, only a few still tied a ribbon on their right wrist. These people the king recognized and showed mercy. After the tragedy and death came to an end, the evil warlord fled from the king's nation to never return again. As the evil warlord fled, he destroyed all of the remaining people that were banished to the outskirts of the kingdom, and he took with him the slain bodies that did not keep the king's sign. The entire goal of the warlord was never to steal the king's nation, because he knew that this would be impossible. Instead, his goal was to trick as many of the king's children and people into joining him in death and banishment. The evil warlord was so wicked that he believed that if he could not rule the king's kingdom, then he did not want anyone to live there. Thankfully, the king knew the evil warlord's heart and left a sign to save his chosen people. Sadly, not everyone believed and followed the message. The end. This was a fictional story, but I was inspired to write something that I believe shows a picture of what has really happened to us as children of God, or his true name in Hebrew, Ahaya. There really was and still is a great king. His name is Yeshaya, which means my Savior. The world today ignorantly calls him Jesus. Negroes, Hispanics, and Native Americans are all children of Israel and are all considered one nation. God did leave a sign to distinguish us from the other nations. That sign is the keeping of his Sabbaths and his laws. God did write us a letter with instructions. That letter is the Holy Bible. There is an evil warlord who wants to deceive us. That evil lord is Satan. Satan did deceive many people into believing that it's okay to change or dismiss God's laws. Satan wants people to believe that the Sabbath is on Sunday, or that it doesn't matter which day we honor and hold holy. Even worse, Satan wants us to believe that Christ is not coming back to judge the people of the earth for our actions. The Holy Bible explains to us that Christ will come again, and there will be those who either bear the mark of the beast or the seal of Ahaya. Whether we want to or not, we all have to choose who we will follow. Failing to choose because you don't believe in the Bible will get you the same results as if you choose to follow Satan. Being deceived into worshiping in error will have you considered as being least in the kingdom of heaven. Only those who obey God's laws and keep his Sabbaths will be considered great in the kingdom of heaven. I pray that more of us seek the truth and share it with others.